Hey, it's Paul Macetta, and today I want to give you 3 tips for active listening. Now, I can tell you as somebody that studies influence, persuasion, salesmanship, human psychology, and communication, not only teaching it professionally for the past decade or so and studying it for as far back as I can remember, but in just observing people, I can tell you that active listening is probably the biggest fault, or the lack of active listening, I should say, is the biggest fault that many people have when it comes to communicating. You see, people think that becoming an expert communicator is mostly about how good you sound, or what you say, or how slick your delivery is when you communicate with people. And look, that's certainly part of it. But more important than that is active listening. Because if you're not listening to what other people are saying to you, you don't really know what to say back to them in order for your message to really resonate with them. And I can tell you, like I said, in just observing people, I would say as much as 95% of the people that I communicate with on a daily basis are very, very poor active listeners. Most of them are chomping at the bit, just waiting for me to stop talking or speaking so that they can say what they want to say, which is fine, because that puts me in a position to do exactly what I'm going to tell you to do today, which is active listening, where you're not the one doing most of the talking, right? So number 1 is to actually pay attention to the speaker, not just the words that are coming out of their mouth. Because people can say one thing with their mouth, but they can actually mean something completely different. And so you want to pay attention to their body language, to their vocal pace, to their tonality, to their rhythm, to the way that they're speaking about the thing that they're talking about, rather than just the words that are coming out of their mouth, because that's going to give you a really clear indication of how they really feel about the topic that they're talking about, right? And that's going to let you know, like what is their true opinion about what they're saying, right? And that enables you to ask them deeper level questions to get them to elaborate on things, instead of just nodding your head and yesing them to death, just kind of making sure that you hear the words that they're saying without really understanding the meaning and the context behind those words. The second thing that you want to do is you always want to convey open body language that lets them know that you're receptive to what they are telling you. Now, I talk about open body language a lot, but like one of the simplest examples I can give is like open body language is when you communicate with your hands and your arms open so that you are displaying your vital organs, right? Your lungs, your heart, your stomach, etc. And the reason why this is important is because long before we communicated with language, we communicated with body language, right? And so this is a part of us that's still hardwired into that like reptilian brain of ours, where when we communicate with other people, back in those days, if we had something to hide, like we communicated like this, right? Like we protected those organs. Well, that message is still communicated non-verbally when you communicate with somebody else. And so if you're talking to somebody and you're sitting there with your arms crossed, whether you realize it or not, you are conveying a message to that person which tells them that you are defensive. And that's the last thing that you want to do. So you want to constantly be using open body language, which tells that person that you're receptive to what they are saying to you. And then the last and final thing that you want to do is you want to constantly ask probing questions when someone is talking to you. So another key indicator that I can tell whether or not somebody's really listening to me, or if they're actually interested in what I have to say to them. So both of those things are things that you want to always communicate. You always want to communicate that you're listening, and you want to communicate that you're interested, because people like to talk about themselves, and they like to know that other people want to listen and are interested in what they have to say. Well, one of the ways that I know people are either not listening to me or they're not interested in anything I have to say is if I tell them something and they don't even ask me a probing question about it, right? So like, let's say I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine and I'm like, yeah, so I was in the emergency room yesterday for 3 hours, and they're just like, oh yeah, man, that sucks. And then they just kind of move on to the next thing without saying to me, like, so what happened? So you were in the emergency room? Did you get hurt? Is everything okay? Like, now, of course, that's an extreme example, right? But there are some not so extreme examples where, you know, I might be talking to somebody and I might be like, oh, you know, I just started up this new business and I'm really excited about it. And they're like, oh, that sounds awesome. And then they just move on to the next thing without saying like, oh, that's great. So what kind of a business is it? What are you selling? How did you get involved with it? How did you get started? What caused this? What's going on with your other business? Did you leave that? Or is this another thing? Do you have a partner in this thing? So you always want to ask probing questions that probe a little bit deeper into what someone is talking to you about. Now, that circles right back to the first tip that I gave you, which is to constantly pay attention to the speaker themselves rather than just the words that are coming out of their mouth. Because if you're not going to know which probing questions to ask. So make sure you do that. Look, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a subscribe, leave me a comment, hit that bell notification so you get notified when I release more videos like this, and I'll see you next time.